All right, hello and good evening. Thanks for being with us tonight. I'm Blake Burman. President Trump name-checking the Insurrection Act as another officer fires on a protester in Minneapolis. Homeland Security saying there are no plans to pull out of Minnesota.
We did discuss the Insurrection Act. He certainly has the constitutional authority to utilize that. My hope is that this leadership team in Minnesota will start to work with us to get criminals off the streets.
Plus, the presidential checkup. The White House releasing its long-awaited health care plan. So what might be in it for you? One of the top doctors in Congress joins us in moments. Also this evening, the commander-in-chief's decision. Warships on the move. So what is the administration right now trying to tell the people of Iran? Carrie Lake is with us tonight as well. And the Nobel Peace Prize winner enters the White House. What that could potentially mean for the president's plan as he says the U.S. will run Venezuela. But first tonight, a second shooting. The government saying an ICE officer forced to fire after being ambushed in Minneapolis. This right here, just some of the scene Wednesday evening. Tear gas, stun grenades, and protesters chanting F ICE. A little more colorful than that, as you might imagine, as federal agents push back. And when our NewsNation cameras were rolling this morning, this was part of the scene there on the streets in Minneapolis. Workers there forced to clean up what we are told was left after protesters broke into the vehicles of federal officers. Our Allie Bradley on the scene for us once again in Minneapolis as President Trump today with a statement and a big one, Allie, for those there in Minnesota tonight.
Yeah, hey, Blake, you're exactly right. The president saying that he could invoke the Insurrection Act. Of course, that would give him powers to deploy military domestically and also federalize the National Guard, something we have not seen since the Rodney King riots. Now, it's in response to the clashes that we saw last night when after the second ICE-involved officer shooting happened just a week apart from the one where Renee Good was killed. Now, we actually got the identities of the three subjects who were involved in that altercation with ICE in that issue that happened. DHS says the three individuals used shovels and broomsticks as weapons after ICE attempted to arrest Julio Cesar Sosa Siles, who is here illegally from Venezuela. He was a target subject and he was shot in the leg in the altercation. He's the one in the middle there on your screen. According to the agency, he was previously convicted for driving without a license and arrested for 2 counts of giving a false name to a peace officer. He was released by Minnesota authorities before ICE lodged a detainer. Sosa Siles illegally entered the U.S. in August of 2022. The other 2 on your screen there that were involved in the altercation are also here illegally from Venezuela. According to DHS, those 2 men ran out of an apartment and started kind of joining in the altercation and wielding those broomsticks and snow shovels. And those clashes broke out shortly after the shooting in North Minneapolis. Tear gas, several flashbangs deployed. Federal law enforcement were trying to push the crowd back. And we can confirm exclusively here that at least one protester who was arrested for assaulting federal law enforcement actually had a loaded gun on him. He's now in custody. 2 government vehicles were also left behind and looted. DHS Secretary Kristi Noem saying they were FBI vehicles, according to her knowledge. Now, a gun was taken from one of those vehicles, according to sources. There were also documents inside. That's what you're seeing right there. Names and information of officers were apparently taken by protesters. The city was there cleaning things up this morning, saying they're going to throw everything away. Now, the secretary added that the ICE officer who was hit by that shovel, was attacked there, was badly beaten and injured, and he is getting treatment right now. The gentleman who was shot in the leg, he's also in the hospital. Governor Walz says he's making a call now, Blake, to turn the temperature down, but he is telling everyone, get out there and record everything that ICE is doing. Blake.
Allie Bradley on the streets of Minneapolis for us once again tonight. Allie, thank you. Joining me now is Jonathan Fahey, former acting director of ICE, former Homeland Security official as well. If I caught that right, and hello, John, nice to hear you. I think you could hear some of those protests and the language there in the background as Allie was signing off for us. What are these officers facing tonight?
They are facing probably the most extreme danger they've faced as law enforcement agents because, remember, these ICE agents are out there arresting criminal illegal aliens, so it's already a dangerous job, but you add on top of it I don't even want to call them protesters in many cases, but rioters or obstructionists. And you have them fighting them as well as the Minnesota elected officials that are using their political influence to undermine, demonize, and dehumanize these ICE agents. So they're put under extreme stress. And it's remarkable to me that even a week into this, Minnesota, it's sort of reminiscent of 2020, Minnesota cannot get their act together and let rioters just run amok, and we're seeing a repeat.
Does ICE need to change tactics at all?
I don't think so, because what have they been doing? They are arresting criminal illegal aliens, and they are supposed to do that. This idea that they're using the wrong tactics or anything else, they shouldn't have to be facing people obstructing them and doing their jobs. There's one thing to protest and, have your voice heard. That's not what's going on here. These are people that are actively trying to impede them in doing their jobs. And remember, if they weren't successful in doing their jobs and removing illegal aliens, the Democrats wouldn't be that upset about it. But it's unfortunate, but a core part of the Democrat electoral sort of policy right now is illegal immigrants, and if they're getting deported, that's hurting the Democrats electorally, and I think that's what really this is all about here.
I know you bring up Democrats, but here's polling nationwide. On the fatal shooting of, do you approve or disapprove of the way ICE is enforcing immigration laws? Only 40%, John, approve, and when it comes to the video that we all saw of that shooting there of Renee Good, 53% said not justified. So what does the administration need to do to assure the American public that the actions of ICE are just and proper?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. They're fighting the uphill battle against the media, against the Democratic Party, which have a large media megaphone here. But the fact of the matter, this shooting, you don't take a poll to decide if it's justified or not. People in law enforcement, I've done these types of things on both sides of the aisle, will tell you by and large that this was an appropriate use of force by that agent, and whether or not the polling supports it really is not the issue here. But ultimately, ICE needs to keep doing their job because the community is getting safer. In spite of what Jacob Fry says, we are having a 20-year low in terms of reduction of serious crime this year. Part of it is because the Trump administration has deported over 400,000 illegal aliens with criminal records. So people are getting safer. People are having a higher quality of life. Rents are down. Wages are up. So the message needs to get out there on those things as well.
I hear you. All right, John Fahey, former acting director over at ICE. John, thank you so much. I want to note here the state of Maine preparing to join Minnesota as potential next targets for ICE and the crackdown on illegal immigrants. Both states facing allegations of fraud, Maine and Minneapolis. The Maine Democratic Congresswoman Shelley Pingree actually just landed in Minnesota for a look at the ICE operations there. You'll hear that side of the argument coming up here on the Hill. Meantime, President Trump pitched the framework today for health care from the Oval Office in a video that was released.
We're calling it the Great Health Care Plan. Instead of putting the needs of big corporations and special interests first, our plan finally puts you first and puts more money in your pocket.
The release comes 2 weeks into 2026 as millions of Americans feel the sting of expired Obamacare subsidies and spiking health insurance premiums. Right now, Congress is debating whether to extend those tax credits. It's the latest cost jump in a decades-long climb for health insurance that happened under both Republican and Democratic administrations. You can see the chart here. Since the turn of the century, both healthcare costs and healthcare premiums have steadily risen, and that goes before Obamacare and after it. Joining me now, Rich McCormick, Republican from the state of Georgia. I should also mention a physician. Doctor, Congressman, thanks for being with us tonight here on the Hill. I want your perspective here. Obviously, you're a Republican who supports the president. You're also a doctor. I just showed that chart, right? They went up under Bush. They went up under Obama. They went up under Trump. They went up under Biden, and they're still going up again under Trump. So let's set that aside. $5.3 trillion in health care costs this country spends. The president put out his plan today, and it calls for a host of things, Congressman, including lowering prescription drug prices, allowing Americans to buy their own insurance, requiring providers to post their pricing, and then the whole most favored nations clause. Do you understand what the president is trying to do here with his health care plan?
I do, and this has been a frustration for all doctors and hospitals and insurance companies. It's a moving target, and what happened during the George W. Bush era is we expanded Medicare dramatically, Part D, and that's what created that initial thing. The more the federal government gets in, the more expensive it gets, of course, because it's coming out of the federal budget. But realize that right now I see the largest expense for all Americans. It is a $5 trillion budget that we spend on that per year. Now, half of that comes from the American government, and half comes from your out-of-pocket expenses, but the average family spends more on healthcare than anything else they'll spend money on. That's just where we're at right now. It's far too expensive. It doesn't compare to any other nation around the world. So one of the things we did was say, okay, why don't we have the same drug prices as other countries for the same exact drug products? It doesn't make sense.
And President Trump wants Congress to codify that.
Correct.
Right. I'm looking, though, Congressman, at this. President's been president for 5 years, 4 in the first term, 1 now. He's been on the national stage politically for a decade. And the White House put out today basically a one-sheeter. How's that possible a decade in for this president?
Because of all the thick pages haven't done us very well. I mean, if you think about the Affordable Care Act, what was it, 3,000 pages? How did that do for us? Sometimes keeping it more simple is actually better. It's easier to pass, first of all. It's easier to understand, and you actually get to read it. Remember when the Affordable Care Act was passed, not one congressman, not one senator, and certainly not the president or his staff read that thing. Everybody voted on it assuming it was good. And look at what it's led to. Your premiums, you probably have at least 90% higher premiums. Your copay has gone up. Your deductible has gone up. The insurance companies are making 230% more in net profit since the Affordable Care Act. Doctors make less by 30%. Hospitals struggling and closing all around America. This is a failed system we're in right now, and we're paying a premium for
what
a
about
failed
keeping
system that
what about
nobody else
keeping
around the world
Obamacare?
pays for.
Yeah, what about keeping Obamacare, though, Congressman? Because the president talked today about cost-sharing reduction for health care plans. That's a staple of Obamacare. So it seems like some of that is going to stay. Does that mean this idea of repealing Obamacare is dead?
It's pretty much dead because we need 60 votes, so it's not going to happen. So the reality is we need to tweak it. We need to create a competitive market where you have something to compete with the Affordable Care Act, which is far from affordable. If you have a free market solution where you say you have to have transparent pricing, we have to know what you're offering, and we're going to give you the money so you can choose between these programs, it's going to force the price point down. I'll give you a perfect example. The one thing that's not covered by insurance that everybody kind of goes to is LASIK eye surgery. It costs about the same as it did 40 years ago because it's an out-of-pocket expense and because it was competitive in nature and because people had to price it right. When insurance gets involved, when government gets involved, the price point always goes up. Look what they've done to education and energy and everything else that the government gets involved with. Okay. It always becomes more expensive.
The cost of health care since 2000, inflation up 87%. Again, that's over 25 years, right?
Exactly.
Healthcare up 312%. So basically running somewhere around 3.5 times more than that. Congressman McCormick, Dr. McCormick, with us tonight here on the Hill. We'll catch you again soon.
Always a pleasure.
All right. Still to come tonight. Is Maine the next location for ICE? Maine's Democratic Congresswoman Shelley Pingree joins us live, just landed in Minneapolis. As we continue our coverage there, what's happening in that state, and is ICE headed to Maine next? Plus, prized possession, what the Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado offered the president. She looks to persuade him to hold elections in Venezuela, and new U.S. sanctions against Iran this evening. Busy news day. I'm Blake Burman. I'm back on the other side, 4 minutes out. See you then. All right, just about 5:15, Minneapolis, Minnesota tonight. ICE operations continuing there. Officials in Maine, by the way, now expecting federal immigration enforcement potentially in the coming days. The Democratic Congresswoman Shelley Pingree of Maine is actually in Minnesota. On the ground look there with us tonight. Congresswoman, thanks for being with us. So you're some 1,500 miles away, right? You represent Portland, Maine, the biggest city in your state. You're in Minneapolis tonight. Why'd you feel the need to go?
Well, I'm in Minneapolis for a day and then, of course, headed back to Maine, where my constituents are extremely concerned. We're holding a shadow hearing tomorrow, and it's an opportunity to hear from law enforcement, from the governor, the attorney general, and advocacy groups. And because my state is on edge, I thought, what better way to understand a little bit about how Minnesota is handling it, what the challenges are, what the legal issues are, but join my colleagues and spend tomorrow morning in a hearing in Minnesota. But Maine is on edge. We've gotten these reports that ICE is moving into our state. And people are just so deeply concerned after watching the videos and seeing what's going on in Minnesota. They're just really worried about what could happen to us.
So here's the governor of your state, Janet Mills, and then we'll pick it up on the other side.
Yep.
To the federal government, I say this. If your plan is to come here to be provocative and to undermine the civil rights of Maine residents, do not be confused. Those tactics are not welcome here.
You know, Congresswoman, ICE officers are American, everyday, ordinary Americans who just wake up and they go to their job, tax-paying Americans. And we've seen ICE operations in other states not reach this level or anything close to it, right, in Minneapolis. And when you hear the governor say that, is she sort of prejudging what could potentially come in Maine?
Well, we've already had the president talk about, about Somalis living in Maine. We have about under 3,000 Somalis who live in our state, and try to equate some of the issues that went on with a fraud case in Minnesota to Maine. And I think that was already provocative and stirring it up. You know, my office, we have a lot of new Mainers and a lot of asylum seekers, refugees who reside in my district. So my office has about 3 people who just work on these issues every day. We have a close relationship with ICE. We are able to track down people when they've been deported. We're able to reunite family members. We work on work permits. So we're very accustomed in our state to working with ICE and Border Patrol and ATF and many of the other agents who are often involved in this thing. But the idea that the governor can't even get information from the federal government about ICE officers being moved to our state, and then the things that we're seeing in Minnesota where the ICE officers seem to behave differently than our law enforcement. They're masked. They won't give their name.
Are they going to cooperate with ICE officers in Maine?
Well, I mean, if they are here with legal warrants looking for actual criminals, of course they would cooperate. We've already had, ICE using our county prisons. We've already had some level of cooperation, but it's very different when they're trying to deport somebody who should be legally deported from our state, who has a criminal record or other things, than if they're just here doing some of the same things we're seeing in Minnesota, asking for papers, bashing in car windows, upsetting peaceful protesters. Believe me, my state has a lot of, people who are going to be out there exercising their legal rights. And, we're already talking to people about how to be safe. We're talking to immigrants about how to make sure you're protected if this happens. Our employers are worried. We've talked to them almost more than anybody else.
You mentioned the fraud there in your home state of Maine. NewsNation, of course, reporting on the investigation, the allegations of widespread billing fraud. This involves the Gateway Community Services and Medicaid there in your state. Another case, potentially $2 million stolen from victims of the Lewiston shooting. Both involve allegedly this members of the Somali community there. How widespread, Congresswoman, do you believe this to be?
Well, I think it's very minimal, and there are a very small population of Somalis, many of whom are American citizens and have been in our state for a decade or more. If there is fraud, and I know investigations are going on at either of these 2 operations that you're talking about, of course it should be investigated. Of course anyone who did criminal activity should be arrested. But as our governor said, we don't need ICE to come into our state to exercise warrants or to investigate fraud. The federal government is already doing that, and our state government is doing that. So I am not arguing with them about that. But if they bring another 100 people in to a community like Lewiston, which only has 100 residents, and just start knocking on doors or doing some of the things we've been seeing in Minnesota, people will be deeply upset. I mean, I understand that the president made it a priority, but he told us he was going to make sure that the border was secure, and he was going to make sure the criminals and rapists were removed from our country. But asking American citizens for their papers, or just asking people who are black and brown, that's very different.
So I put you on, you're fine with an investigation there in your home state.
I mean, an investigation is a reasonable thing. If there are allegations of fraud, of course that should be happening. And I think that our state is already doing that.
We'll leave it there. She's in Minneapolis tonight, represents the Portland area in Maine. Congresswoman Shelley Pingree with us here on the Hill. Of course. See you again soon. All right, still to come. Here on the other side, a new betting scandal rocking college basketball. Plus, this was so cool, the splashdown in the Pacific. 4 astronauts returning to Earth. The scene today will tell you why. And getting the message across, Voice of America facing accusations of keeping Iranian protesters from getting the truth. The head of the network, or at least who runs it, oversees it, Carrie Lake, with us here to respond in minutes. Bottom of the hour, just about 6:30 here on the East Coast. Some of the top stories coming in our newsroom tonight. The Venezuelan opposition leader, Maria Corina Machado, visiting the White House today, less than 2 weeks after the U.S. forces captured Nicolas Maduro. President Trump and Machado meeting behind closed doors to discuss the country's future. The president had previously dismissed her as an option to take over Venezuela.
I think the president's assessment that you just pointed out was based on realities on the ground. It was a realistic assessment based on what the president was reading and hearing from his advisors and national security team. And at this moment in time, his opinion on that matter has not changed.
During that meeting, Machado said she presented the president with her Nobel Peace Prize medal. She won it last year, 2025, but she did not say whether the president took it. How about this? This is wild, out of this earth and really in it, as well as 4 astronauts landed off the coast of San Diego in NASA's first ever medical evacuation. The space agency says all 4 members of Crew 11 are safe and in good spirits, but would not say what that medical issue was that led to the return of the crew from space nearly a month early. Meantime, federal prosecutors have indicted 26 people, accusing them of rigging college basketball games here at home and in China as well. U.S. attorneys say the investigation uncovered 17 different Division I men's basketball players, either fixing or attempting to fix 29 games from 2022 to 2025. Those allegedly involved include former college basketball players who offered bribes between $10,000 and $30,000 a game to current players to fix those games. Back in Washington, President Trump not ruling out potential military action in Iran, saying there will be consequences if killing anti-government protesters continue there. However, the Treasury Department now announcing new sanctions against Iranian officials. Our Kelly Meyer live at the White House this evening with the latest there. Kelly, as it seems that the president continues to get briefed on options and what may or may not come next.
Yeah, hey there, Blake. So we've been hearing more about why the president could be holding off on those strikes. Sources telling me, for one, the strikes wouldn't be enough to bring down the regime and it could lead to a wider conflict. And then sources in the region tell me the Qataris and the Saudis were pushing President Trump not to strike and to give Iran a chance. So I pressed the White House press secretary today on all of this and if it changed his mind. Take a listen.
I would say a lot of these stories, to be honest with you, I've been reading them, and they have been based on anonymous sources who are pretending or guessing to know the president's thinking. The truth is, only President Trump knows what he's going to do, and a very, very small team of advisors are read into his thinking on that.
We do know the battleship, the USS Abraham Lincoln, is making its way to the Middle East. We broke that news here on the Hill last night, Blake, but it's accompanied by multiple warships, including at least 1 attack submarine. But that could take a week or so to get over there. There's also the concern that the president had so much focus on the Caribbean and moved so much military hardware to that region that he had limited options in the Middle East. But Leavitt told me that the president continues to closely monitor and keep all of his options on the table. We also heard that from the UN Security Council today, the U.S. Ambassador Mike Waltz. He said the U.S. stands by the brave people of Iran and also echoed that all options are on the table. He says protests continue, though at a smaller scale than last week. And state media says the execution of the 26-year-old did not happen yesterday. He has not been sentenced to death. And Leavitt told me today that they have seen 800 people have their lives spared. But Iranian Americans I've been speaking with and continue to post on my X account here, they say they still can't contact their loved ones. The blackout continues. And though the protests may have slowed down due to the crackdown by authorities, people are fearful of leaving their homes. And as a result of that, the president does continue to monitor this. Blake?
Kelly Meyer, live for us tonight over at 1600. Kelly, thank you. Well, as Kelly reported, protests have all but smothered in Iran after a nationwide crackdown and internet outage. The protests have been growing in size and violence since late December, but a week after the regime shut the country off from the world, essentially, and a crackdown that has reportedly killed more than 2,000 people, protests are now virtually absent, which has some wondering about Voice of America and its role in getting the message to Iranian activists. VOA, as it's known, is the largest U.S. international broadcaster funded by the government, delivering news across the globe with an American perspective, a possible tool for any president, really, to get their message in around the world, in this case, to the Iranian people. In March, President Trump signed an executive order to reduce the size of the U.S. Agency for Global Media, which oversees VOA, to the minimum level required by law. Courts have pushed back on the downsizing effort. Last night, the former Battleground States Director for the Biden and Harris campaigns, Dan Cannon, had this to say about the organization's efforts in Iran, citing Kari Lake, the deputy CEO for the U.S. Agency for Global Media.
Kari Lake has shut down the Voice of America and Radio Free Europe, getting messages into Iran, which could help to actually have the civilian population hear some of the message Trump wants to get to them.
Now, some Republicans even echoing concerns. Congressman Don Bacon recently saying, quote, "This is when we need a strong Voice of America, beaming information into Iran. Some in the administration underestimate the value that VOA brings, but now it's an important tool for the president and our national security team." With us tonight, Kari Lake, Deputy CEO at the U.S. Agency for Global Media. Thank you for coming on in. We've done this virtually. We had a different role. And
we called you and said, please let us respond to these lives.
And here you are. So tell me, what are the capabilities tonight from VOA into Iran?
First of all, I would love for Dan and Don to actually do a little research before they come out and spew lies. Obviously, the internet's been shut down. We have been up and running, and we're putting out broadcasting on satellite. And we've been doing that for months upon months. Just because we brought this agency down to statutory minimum doesn't mean we're not covering Iran. This is an important, a hugely important story. And you've been in news for a long time. When a big story breaks, you ramp things up. We are doing even more coverage than we have been doing. We are doing several hours a day. We have more people on the ground covering this story, and we're getting our word and message into Iran.
There's a difference between more reporting than we have been doing and what you could be doing, sort of, say, at its peak, right? Because you had wanted to downsize the agency 85%. I think any business can take some downsizing, not that this is a business, but the point is, if you wanted to bring it down that much, are you putting out there what you could potentially be putting out?
I think we're putting out probably more than they've done before. And I think we have a bigger staff than we had before. This is the most historic moment in Iran's history. There's a real shot for freedom for the people of Iran. And I really resent the fact that people like Don and Dan come on and just lied and saying that we're not covering Iran. We're covering it with great intensity. And we're also working with Congress right now. We just notified Congress today. We're working with the State Department and some outside entities to make sure that we're getting information in, considering the blackout.
What's the message?
What's the message?
What are Iranians hearing?
The Iranians are hearing that there's support for them, that we support the people of Iran, that when they finally get their freedom, that they will be able to choose a leader for this great country, and that we're with them, that America stands with the people of Iran. I'm
looking at the funding, Kari, because in the budget request from the administration was $153 million. And there's a bipartisan spending deal, that now gives the agency basically around $640-something million, right? More than 4x. Do you want the money after trying to downsize the agency?
Well, we asked for less money. We can do this with less money. Think about the newsrooms you've been in. I've been in newsrooms for 30 years. Most newsrooms have had cuts. Because of technology, we don't need as many people. We don't need as much money. The only ones that don't have cuts are the government-run news agencies. So we're just right-sizing it and modernizing it. We can do news, and we can do it with less money. I think of iHeartRadio. Think of how massive that organization is. Their entire budget is $90 million. Our budget was almost $1 billion, and we never did as much news as iHeartRadio put out. The government never wants to cut back. We're showing them that we can cut back on the amount of money spent. We can trim things down, right-size things, and still cover it. And they're mad about that on Capitol Hill because when we do it, that means other agencies can do it, and they don't want to trim the fat.
Are you going to spend, plans to spend all of that, call it $640 million?
I understand how the appropriations process works. They appropriate money, and they got to get the votes. They've got to get 60 votes, right? So they probably felt they couldn't put what we had asked for. The Appropriation Act requires us to spend the money they give us. I'm happy that we are at least shrinking the budget because we simply don't need it, and it's the American taxpayers' hard-earned money. I'm telling the appropriation folks, we don't need the money. Please don't give us this much. We can do it for far less. And unfortunately, they gave us far more, but at least it's going in the right direction.
All right, we'll leave it there. Carrie Lake coming on in with us tonight.
Appreciate
Thanks for being here. Appreciate it. All right, still to come. Other side, President Trump threatens to invoke the Insurrection Act. How the president's push to secure the border has come to this as anger reaches a fever pitch. Once again, live pictures as it is sundown and the night is upon us in Minneapolis this evening.
The Insurrection Act is a tool at the president's disposal. As you know, it has been used sparingly, but it has been used by previous presidents in American history. And I think the president's Truth Social post spoke very loud and clear to Democrats across this country, elected officials who are using their platforms to encourage violence against federal law enforcement officers.
The press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, there reiterating President Trump's authority, as he puts it, to invoke the Insurrection Act potentially. The president floating that 19th century law on Truth Social this morning with everything that is ongoing in Minneapolis. Full panel here. With me now, Julia Manchester, White House reporter for The Hill. Erin McGuire is a Republican strategist. And her sparring partner, Democratic strategist Kurt Bordella, NewsNation contributor. Hello to you both.
Hello.
Thanks for being here. We'll get to you in a second, Julia. That's quite the threat there from the commander-in-chief, but he feels maybe it's gotten to this point.
Well, and it's not the first time President Trump has floated using the Insurrection Act. In fact, last October, he floated this while talking to reporters, talking about, the possibility of courts striking down his ability to send the National Guard to cities to bring down crime rates. The difference between sending the National Guard to cities and the Insurrection Act is that I'd say, obviously, the Insurrection Act ramps things up even more. You can send out active military troops, for example. But overall, just taking a step back, I think this shows really the growing conflict we're seeing between the federal government and state governments, particularly and obviously Democratic or blue state governments, and how they're dealing with this issue. Minnesota is ground zero for it.
I think this is certainly going to ramp things up. I know last week when we were on the program, we were talking about whether or not sending in the National Guard was the right thing to do and whether or not that would increase tensions. I think that this threat would do that as well. But I also think what you're seeing out of Minnesota is the inability for local law enforcement to do their jobs because of the duly elected governor and mayor. Right now, there are violent protests, violent riots. They are stealing things from federal law enforcement. They are vandalizing. They are attacking law enforcement with brooms and shovels. At what point do they say in Minnesota, enough is enough? We can protect law enforcement. We can protect our communities. We don't have to put people in danger, because for every member of law enforcement that is attacked, that is one member of the community that is safer, because those people with shovels and brooms might be going after ICE, but that is any member of the community they could be going after. That is either a father, a brother, a son, a wife, a sister. That is a member of the American community that is being attacked. And it was attacked by an illegal immigrant, I believe, today in Minnesota. At a certain point, they need to be able to ramp up, because this can't continue this way.
See, the only person who lost their life recently in any of this was actually an American citizen, not an illegal immigrant, not a member of law enforcement.
She used her car to try to ram law enforcement. It was
an American citizen who got killed by our law enforcement that's supposed to protect and serve. And it feels like right now the linchpin for all this conflict is actually the presence of federal officials, federal law enforcement. They are the center of this conflict, and law enforcement is supposed to be about de-escalating, not escalating. Violence and physicality should be the last resort, not the first resort. The Insurrection Act in modern times has been used, 3 times? The last time we used it was in 1992.
Rodney King and then civil rights
34
era.
years ago. Like, this is not something that should just be flippantly thrown out there as some threat gesture designed to justify using excessive force whenever you want and trampling all over American citizens.
I think that's completely unfair to say excessive force.
Don't interrupt me, Aaron.
So
I will.
I started the show with the former ICE director at the end of the first Trump administration. Here he was. Does ICE need to change tactics at all?
I don't think so, because what have they been doing? They are arresting criminal illegal aliens, and they are supposed to do that. This idea that they're using the wrong tactics or anything else, they shouldn't have to be facing people obstructing them and doing their jobs.
And Julia, the administration is going forward, and next could be Maine.
They're going forward. They're leaning in. Maine, absolutely next. You know, look, like I said, I think this is the administration looking. I mean, Maine's obviously a different example, but for a state like Minnesota, this is the administration going toe-to-toe with Democratic state leadership, and they're using this issue of law enforcement, local versus federal, to do that.
You want Susan Collins to lose her Senate seat? Bring this show to Maine.
I think Susan Collins remains an anomaly. I wouldn't put her in any category that ties her to Trump, and you and I both know that when the president just called her and reamed her out on the phone.
Democrats will tie her to Trump.
I think she can run her own race.
Something tells me they'll be tying to Trump when that happens.
Yeah, it doesn't work that way. How's that Nazi going in Maine?
Speaking of Democrats, is there a warning sign heading into the elections and on to 2028? David Plouffe, you might know the name, former top advisor to Kamala Harris, Barack Obama, writing in an op-ed that, quote, Democrats will lose in 2028 unless they change course now. He argues that the recent wins are a referendum on the party in power and not necessarily a true sign of momentum for your team, Kurt. He says you need to focus on costs, expanding Medicare, being able to explain what you want to talk about on the economy in 10 seconds on TikTok, get to jobs. And as I've been telling everyone on this show for about a month now, you better plan for AI. He says it's going to be bigger than you think in 2026 and maybe the top issue in 2028. Step back for everything that he says there. The headline is Democrats will lose unless they change course now. Is he wrong?
Yes and no. I generally believe both parties are guilty of this. They learn the wrong lessons from perceived success politically. They think that, oh, we did better than people thought we would, so what we're doing is working. And I agree, oftentimes it is a referendum on the people and the party in power. So on that part, I think he's right. The other part, well, we should talk about the economy. And it's like, okay, thank you, Captain Obvious. Like, that's brilliant and insightful. Who would have thunk that? I wish someone would go out there and say, we should all talk about jobs in the economy. That never would have occurred to me.
Never
Thank God for brilliant strategists like us, right?
Oh, you know, this is what they get paid the big bucks for in politics, is stating the obvious. One thing about that piece that stood out to me is he didn't say attack Trump. He didn't say in it, continue to go after Donald Trump. Bad man, orange man, don't do that, right? What he said was talk about things that are affecting people's lives. And to Kurt's point, which I think is stating the obvious again here, no wonder. People want to talk about what's going on with them. It is shown time and again when Democrats focus on Trump, try to make him their driving message, it fails. It's like when they tried the attack on democracy lines and all of those type of things. It has not worked. So yes, you need to talk to people about what's going on. And this is one of the top Democrat strategists with his best advice to talk about the obvious.
Real quickly, it's kind of what Chuck Schumer wants.
It's what Chuck Schumer wants to do, but at the same time, you have a lot of House Democrats, for example, floating impeaching administration officials like Kristi Noem. And Donald Trump is picking up on that. He is warning the Republican-based House Republicans that if I'm not reelected, they will try to impeach me. So they're trying to use this anti-Trump messaging. The president would call it Trump derangement syndrome, whatever, to their advantage.
But I think that's fair, though, because those low propensity voters that Trump has brought out, the ones that only come out for him, they need to feel like they have a reason to go out for the midterms. And this could be it, which would be protecting Trump from them, from all these inquiries and an absolute banana republic in the Capitol.
All right, I got to leave it there. Kurt, Aaron, Julia, thank you so much. Still to come, hold my beer. Kurt might. The global health recommendation for a new tax on your alcohol. Is that coming? Next. All right, if you're just getting home, trying to catch up on today's top stories, here's some Hill headlines before we head out this evening. We start with this one. It's 5 o'clock somewhere, I guess. How about this? WHO, World Health Organization, calls for higher taxes on alcohol and sugary drinks. It follows new reports revealing that sugary and alcoholic beverages lead to health problems. Who would have known? The WHO is stepping in, calling for countries to increase prices on products. Sugary drinks like soda are taxed by at least 116 countries. But other sugary products like fruit juice, teas, and sweetened milk aren't taxed. The WHO argues that increasing tax rates on sugary and alcoholic drinks promotes health and prevents disease. Then there was this today over at the White House. The president welcomes the Florida Panthers. They won the Stanley Cup back-to-back years. We're over at the White House today. They all wore red ties there when they were standing there next to the President of the United States. They beat a team from Canada last year, leading to this joke from the president.
What do you think about that, Matthew? We have a little competition with Canada. No, they're great people, though. They're great people. We're doing much better than Canada, but that's okay, right?
All right, to check out those stories and more, all you have to do, head on over to thehill.com. All right, time for my take tonight before we head on out. Can you hear us now? That's Verizon Wireless's ad slogan, but unfortunately for so many people all across this country yesterday, including yours truly, the answer was a resounding no. Instead, they were met with this little SOS signal on the screen. Do we have it? That thing, that was on my phone for like hours yesterday. So many people as well, leaving users unable to make or receive calls or texts, and resulting in tweets like this, wondering what the heck is SOS? Even some saying, get ready for the lawsuit. Now, Verizon posted a message today saying yesterday's outage didn't meet their standard, adding that customers can now claim a $20 credit. Now, you can understand why so many were frustrated, right? But here's the thing. I kind of didn't mind it. So here's a prediction. After 20 years of the iPhone basically changing all of our lives and giving us so much more, I think, just my opinion, I think we're about to see ourselves start asking, how can we use the phone less? I'm Blake. Elizabeth starts now.